That fateful night, I carefully made a hole in the ancient wall, large enough for us to peek inside. In the darkness, our flashlight flickered, its faint glow suddenly illuminating the chilled blood, as if alive, pulsating like a vein. An extraordinary scene unfolded before our eyes. Two black statues, figures of a ruler, stood in the center, as if supported by an unseen force, dressed in bright green sandals that added an extra layer of mystery. Each statue held scepters, ornaments formed from gilded, intricate shapes resembling lodges, from which lion heads hung, symbols of the goddess Hathor and other infernal demonic creatures. The entire scene resembled a mosaic kaleidoscope, exquisitely painted alabaster vessels, sanctuaries made of dark materials with mysterious patterns from which a gold-covered snake peered out, chests, chairs, a magnificent golden throne, all creating the illusion that we had entered the deepest vaults of forgotten civilizations. Around us, chaotic piles of decayed chariots seemed like torn-apart war relics, evoking the sensation that we had suddenly entered an ancient storeroom hidden within the depths of a vanished world, akin to a hall of oblivion in a once great opera house, abandoned by modern times. We couldn't hold back our questions. What did it all mean? Each item in this doomed repository seemed imbued with mysteries. Most bore the name of Pharaoh Tutankhamun, leaving no doubt this was his tomb. Gradually, it became clear. We were uncovering the secrets of treasures, remains, and evidence of the life of an ancient Egyptian ruler, a testament to his regal power and mysterious death. That night, November 26, 1922, entered history as a day of a grand archaeological discovery. It was then that the pharaoh's tomb was unveiled, destined to lie in oblivion for 3,000 years, hidden beneath layers of sand and time. And finally, countless riches surfaced, revealing a world of incredible carvings and inscriptions that told stories of the life and death of a mighty ruler. But beyond the beauty and brilliance of gold, terrifying secrets were also hidden. A dreadful curse, forewarned by legends, that would strike all who dared disturb the pharaoh's rest. The opening ceremony was marred by tragic events. Just 2 months later, under mysterious circumstances, the chief sponsor of the expedition died. Then, one by one, members of the archaeological team passed away. Among the deceased were not only common workers, but also leading researchers, and even Howard Carter himself, the man who became a legend. In European and American newspapers, this story caused a wave of excitement and horror, as readers had the opportunity for years to immerse themselves in an atmosphere of fear and fantasy. Part 2 of 21. The fear was especially intense that everyone involved in the excavations had fallen under the influence of a mysterious curse. Those who touched these ancient treasures either died or disappeared, as if they had been victims of some ancient punishment. Friends, relatives, unwary workers, all became victims of this mystical aura, as if death pursued anyone who dared to venture near the secrets of forgotten civilizations. This captivated many minds. Filled with a mixture of fear and fascination, people memorized their theories and legends, trying to understand what might be concealed behind these tombs. A crowd eager to risk everything for at least a glimpse of the cursed treasure continued to wait in queues at the British Museum, hoping to witness an ancient and seemingly ominous burden hidden within these vast riches. The discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun became a true milestone in the history of archaeology, sparking an unprecedented surge of interest and legends about the mysterious culture of ancient Egypt, where truth, emotion, and fiction intertwined through the accounts of contemporary and past journalists. What exactly happened around 100 years ago during this significant archaeological event? Can the deaths of the leading archaeologists who perished during the excavations be considered unusual, or was there a rational and understandable cause behind them? These are questions that require careful and balanced consideration. But besides this no less captivating story, I want to tell you about another unusual find that quickly became a subject of debate and surprise. A Buddhist Egyptian figurine capable of rotating by itself right in the museum in full view of visitors. Thus, Egyptian civilization is one of the oldest in human history. Over its thousands of years of existence, Egyptian culture underwent numerous transformations and was influenced by various religious and cultural currents. Speaking of religion, it repeatedly changed, from worshipping Assyrian gods and venerating the sun god Aton to adopting Christianity and later Islam. With each new stage, perceptions of the past also shifted, especially regarding sacred monuments and tombs. Previously, it was unthinkable for Egyptians to even consider desecrating the tomb of a living god, and such sacred sites were guarded with utmost diligence. However, for newer generations, these prohibitions became almost negligible. They practically disappeared. New religious missionaries, after the Islamization of the country, convincingly argued that pharaohs were not gods, but merely ancient tyrannical rulers, now more akin to pagan idols that probably reside in hell. As a result, since these monuments and tombs gained a reputation for being marvelous yet inaccessible, their value significantly diminished. Moreover, most of the tombs recently discovered and excavated turned out to be empty. Only broken, looted remains have come down to us, and all jewels and valuables are either in the hands of robbers or had long vanished, long before European researchers arrived. Part 3 of 21. Approximately 1,000 years earlier, as scholars note, all that was possible had already been taken from the tombs multiple times, leaving behind only empty stone walls covered with ancient carvings. For professional Egyptologists and archaeologists of that time, the main focus remained in marveling at the craftsmanship and artistry of the ancients, especially their attention to the carvings on stone walls, which impress with their precision and elegance. The next significant turning point in the history of Egyptian archaeology occurred in the 18th century, in the year 1798. It was then that Napoleon Bonaparte's military campaigns led to a large-scale expedition to Egypt, which gained a different scale and significance than previous excavations. Napoleon brought dozens of scientists, artists, and experts with him to document and study the ancient monuments. During this expedition, the so-called Rosetta Stone was discovered, which soon became a key element in deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs. This important artifact marked the beginning of a new era in understanding ancient Egyptian writing and history. Humanity's long-held secret message from the ancients, remnants of a vanished civilization that had remained an enigma for centuries, was finally revealed. Thanks to the successes of this expedition and the advent of what came to be known as devises, the carvings on the tomb walls ceased to be perceived merely as whimsical and chaotic scribbles, and instead acquired meaning, transforming into the names of rulers and detailed stories about their lives, making the frescoes more accessible and understandable. Moreover, thanks to the discoveries made since then, artifacts brought out of Egypt began to be valued much higher and perceived as an integral part of world cultural heritage. They started to compete in importance and value with ancient Greek or Roman monuments, and the relative neglect of Egyptian treasures in the past centuries gradually became a thing of the past. Up to that point, the value of Egyptian collections was often seen as something beautiful but almost meaningless, a kind of attractive but useless trinket, hiding only emptiness and confusion. Modern Egyptology has become a respected and prestigious scientific discipline worthy of deep recognition. Its popularity gradually increased, and more scholars from around the world began to flock to Egypt, along with treasure hunters and tomb robbers, who adapted to the task of finding treasures that had not yet been looted by ancient thieves. For many researchers and adventurers, the main goal became discovering untouched tombs, but necessarily with rich contents inside, where goods and artifacts from the era of the pharaohs could be preserved. By the beginning of the 20th century, only 5 tombs had been found that merited attention. Among them were the tombs of Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, another highly mysterious ruler, and of course, the famous tomb of Tutankhamun. This pharaoh left a mark in Egyptian history not because of major conquests or architectural achievements, but rather because his personality and tomb remained a mystery for a long time. Tutankhamun became pharaoh at a very young age, only 9 years old, after the tragic death of his father, the extraordinary ruler Akhenaten, who initiated extensive reforms that transformed ancient Egyptian culture and religion. This young pharaoh tried to restore the old traditions and reverse the revolutionary changes implemented by his father, but he faced strong opposition. During his short reign, which ended with his death at the age of 19, little was accomplished besides attempts to recover what was lost and restore the previous status quo. Although his rule was brief and modest, his enigmatic and nearly forgotten tomb made him a true cult figure among Egyptologists. The existence of his lost tomb long driven scholars to search tirelessly for the site of his burial. The search for Tutankhamun's tomb began in the early 20th century. In 1909, more than 20 years after the initial searches, the so-called Tomb of the Chariots was discovered, often bearing the pharaoh's name. Exhausted and disheartened by endless, fruitless searches, scientists began to think they had already found his tomb, especially since the tomb's interior furnishings were quite modest and did not match the wealth of ancient Egyptian royal tombs. However, significant disagreements remained. Most importantly, could this truly be him and his burial site? According to ancient Egyptian customs and notions of rich burials, the tomb should have been more lavishly decorated. The leading supporter of the idea that the real pharaoh's tomb was hidden elsewhere was British archaeologist Howard Carter, an obsessed man dedicated to finding the true burial place. He believed that the richly furnished tomb he sought must be located somewhere else, still untouched. Howard Carter was a man with incredible passion for Egypt. He was literally obsessed with making a great discovery. Moreover, he was persistent and temperamental. Once, while exploring one of the tombs, he and his team were approached by French tourists, who behaved disrespectfully and provocatively. Unable to tolerate it, Carter attacked them and started a fight, after which he even refused to officially apologize to the French consul for the incident. This behavior reflected his fiery nature and devotion to his work. Subsequently, he left government service and dedicated himself solely to excavations, becoming somewhat of a Cairo tour guide and private researcher. It was this kind of person, deeply in love with Egyptian culture, who met George Herbert, Earl of Carnarvon, also a passionate Egypt enthusiast, eager to make an important archaeological discovery. It was this meeting of two passionate enthusiasts that marked the beginning of a new chapter in the history of ancient Egypt research. They shared common goals and a desire to find the tomb of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, who, according to existing assumptions, was still hidden somewhere deep in the Valley of the Kings, concealing his treasures and secrets since the 17th century. Karsten's investments, talent, persistence, and professionalism, along with Count Kornvorn's support and resources, all created the preconditions for finally solving the riddle that had remained buried beneath the dry earth of Egypt for so long. The problem was that the valley had been thoroughly excavated from all sides, and the work had proven to be essentially futile. Not only was nothing valuable found after such extensive excavations, but the area was also repeatedly littered with debris and waste left behind from these deep and sometimes disorderly efforts. As a result, the team of archaeologists led by Carter had to spend years clearing piles of sand, stones, and various construction debris accumulated in the area. This process lasted about 10 years and was very exhausting, monotonous, and boring. During all that time, no significant results were achieved. Initially, the project raised hopes, but the gradual loss of prospects began to test the patience of the organizers, and Lord Cornarvon became increasingly inclined to stop funding the expedition and terminate the work. At this point, Carter managed to persuade him to give one last chance and make one final attempt to find something significant. Finally, on one day, November 24th, 1922, after many years of unsuccessful searches, the long-awaited discovery was made. Workers, removing part of the soil near Ramses' tomb, came across a strange staircase. Its steps seemed to lead to a small opening, sealed with the necropolis's stamp, which remained untouched and intact. Carter, carefully enlarging the hole in the wooden planking, looked inside cautiously. It was obvious that the magnificent tomb of Tutankhamun was hidden right there. There is an ancient belief in Egypt. If you step incorrectly on a slab in an ancient temple, it can activate a curse that condemns you to eternal wandering. Honestly, such a prospect doesn't seem so terrible, more like an exciting adventure. Following the footsteps of ancient gods and pharaohs, stepping onto the map, that's a true adventure. But finding a suitable place to rest after such journeys is already a real quest. Today, archaeologists and adventure enthusiasts no longer have to choose between dangerous expeditions and comfortable relaxation. Thanks to the modern platform Sutochnaya.ru, they can easily find a place to stay anywhere in Russia or beyond, whether it's apartments, cozy houses, or hotels. Part 6 of 21. All of this has been verified through millions of honest reviews and supported by real photographs, which significantly helps in making a choice. Personally, traveling through cities, I came to the conclusion that using Sutochnaya.ru to find accommodations is truly convenient and fast. Just a few clicks, and your lodging is already secured. And if you need to stay somewhere quickly, there's always the option of using the quick booking feature, which is especially relevant when time is critical and everything seems to be on fire. Another important point is that for beginners, pleasant discounts of up to 10% are available on the first booking. And for those who are already experienced travelers, cashback of up to 30% is offered. And the most amazing thing is that this cashback can be used not only to pay for your next trip, but also to give as a gift to a friend. Yes, right from the dealer's shoulder without any extra hassle. In the description, there is my promo code EGYPT, through which you will receive a bonus of 1,000 rubles. Follow the link, choose your ideal oasis for rest or adventure, and don't let ancient curses catch you off guard. Remember, Sutochnaya.ru will definitely help you find a place to relax wherever you are, making your journey not only exciting but also comfortable. In a moment, both Cornwall and Carter suddenly became well known and recognized international explorers. Their names became synonymous with success and fame. However, this joy was short-lived. Almost immediately, unexplained and frightening mystical events started to surround them with their shadow. Interestingly, much of the mysterious atmosphere and intrigue was aided by Carter himself. It was he who, at the beginning of 2023, wrote an article for a newspaper, which resembled a story in the genre of magical realism rather than a dry report. The article began with a description of how, shortly before the discovery of the tomb, he bought a songbird at the market, which greatly entertained the archaeologists during the excavations in a time without loudspeakers, Spotify, or modern sound recording devices. The workers and expedition members believed that this bird brought good luck, as it was thanks to it that they unexpectedly stumbled upon the steps leading to the entrance of the tomb, ultimately leading to the discovery of the burial chamber. Then, this somewhat fragile bird indeed fell ill, and Carter took it home to Cairo. And just before the tomb was opened, a messenger ran to him with sad news. A cobra had suddenly appeared in his house, which bit the poor bird and thus killed it. Coincidence? I don't think so. Carter decided so when his flashlight, its beam illuminating the sarcophagus of Tutankhamun, caught sight of the symbol of royal power, the famous cobra, twisting around a scepter or another object. That's how it happens, dear gentlemen. All the Egyptian workers and expedition members immediately decided that this was a very bad omen, and that ill fate could befall anyone who dared disturb the pharaoh's sleep and disturb his peace. Let's assume for a moment that Carter was not exaggerating and was describing real events. Then the question arises, can a rational explanation be found for all this? Certainly, yes. Carter was a man with a great love for animals. His father, by the way, was a naturalist artist specializing in depicting animals, which reflected the unquestionable love of the entire family for zoology. From a young age, Carter was surrounded by living creatures, pets whom he tirelessly cared for and protected. However, animals of these creatures often died under his care. For example, his favorite donkey was once bitten by a snake, long before he discovered the tomb, and the two gazelles, which he also loved very much, died so sadly that he even recorded in his diary, "It was so tragic that I don't even want to remember." Thus, the bird that died was undoubtedly one of the many pets of the archaeologist, many of whom, unfortunately, met ill fate. So why did Carter decide to deliberately evoke a sense of gloom and mystical mystery in his story? Most likely his goal was to prepare the audience for his upcoming book. And what sells well and piques the interest of the general public is mysticism, enigmas, and unsolved secrets. It's no coincidence that all great writers, when publishing their works, repeatedly use an atmosphere of mystery to boost reader interest and hold their attention. Reading the article, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I could vividly sense the atmosphere of those events. I also have a few dozen more stories like this, each of which could be told in a separate book. Visit a bookstore and definitely pick one up. But if we talk about that particular story, it led to the tomb in Hammond being truly regarded as a place shrouded in a sinister aura, and even cursed. It's important to understand what was happening in the world at the beginning of the 20th century. The brutal First World War had just ended, and the Spanish flu, a terrible global pandemic, was raging, claiming millions of lives across Europe. During this time, spiritualism began experiencing a renaissance, regaining popularity. People participated in rituals attempting to contact the spirits of their deceased loved ones, seeking comfort in the belief in an afterlife. All of this coincided with an interest in ancient Egypt, its rich religions and burial rituals, where treasures and powerful rites seemingly intended for the pharaoh after death. Why all this? Was he going to rise from his tomb one day to rule again? Yes, that's exactly what popular culture claimed, telling stories of risen mummies and curses. Newspapers only added fuel to the fire, publishing sensational articles that announced Lord Carnot had signed an exclusive contract with the Times newspaper. Now, only this newspaper could publish stories about excavations and discoveries, everything firsthand, with photos and interviews with participants. The other journalists were forced to invent details in order not to fall behind the reader's excitement. When reliable sources proved insufficient, any figures were employed, even mediocre specialists or amateurs. For example, Conan Doyle, the famous detective and author of popular stories about Sherlock Holmes, acted as an expert on Egypt, despite having only superficial knowledge of the subject. But why not use his opinion, especially since he had stories of adventures in Egypt, which already made him seem almost an Egyptologist in the eyes of the public? It is appropriate to ask what he thought about ancient spells and curses, eternally engraved in legends and traditions. Meanwhile, writer Maria Corelli, despite lacking deep knowledge of Egypt, enthusiastically told journalists that the pharaoh's guards seemed to be protected by something supernatural, and all members of the expedition, led by Khan, undoubtedly encountered mysterious phenomena and unseen obstacles. Gradually, such stories were expected to lose relevance. All these legends typically crumbled and disappeared into the dust of oblivion over time. But fate decided to make its own adjustments. 4 months after the excavation, Lord Cornwarren fell seriously ill. Initially, he was bitten by a mosquito. Then, due to careless handling during childbirth, he cut the bite site, and the infection penetrated inside, spreading through the blood. And that was all. His body could not withstand it. As a result, the young English aristocrat, only 66 years old, died from a severe pneumonia. On the same day, the lights went out in Cairo, as if fate itself decided to mark the significance of this tragedy. The final argument, which was presented by most skeptically inclined listeners, was the factual report that, on the very same day, Lord's beloved dog had also died in England. This news was perceived as confirmation. After all, wasn't it evidence that some ominous curse had indeed been placed upon the Lord? However, one could always hear in response, what if this is exactly the real action of dark forces? Conan Doyle confidently commented on this, providing his expert opinion. He believed that an evil elemental could have helped cause Lord Cornwarren's fatal illness and had demonstrated its power in this very form. The question of which spirits or elementals might have existed in those times and how they could take on particular facades remained unanswered, since the Egyptians and ancient magicians, people with special knowledge and secrets, knew much more about these entities. When asked why the deadly curse had only affected the Lord and had not killed anyone else, some experts answered foolishly, claiming that if such spirits did not harm everyone indiscriminately, then they simply did not exist at all. Such an approach sounds rather contrived. Similarly, one could argue that if bulldogs do not bite everyone indiscriminately, then they do not exist at all. In this vein, it seems that any foolish advisor could claim that bulldogs are a myth. However, such logic clearly indicates superficiality and unseriousness. It is said that even Conan Doyle, the author of the famous stories about Sherlock Holmes, was a man of sharp intellect and rich imagination, and at times he seemed almost like a fantasist. Meanwhile, in the distant and mysterious land of Egypt, there exists a legend that states, if in ancient times one were to open a long-sealed tomb, it could awaken ancient magic capable of forever changing a person's fate. This is a story often told about those who dared to disturb the peace of past centuries. One of the characters in the new series of The Librarian show found himself trapped by such ancient magic. The story centers on Vikram Chamberlain, a librarian with the unique ability to travel through time. He accidentally finds himself transported from the past into our modern world, thereby unleashing hidden magical forces that begin to play a significant role in his destiny. In the spirit of the best adventure films, the story unfolds vividly and captivates. The hero must assemble a new team, uncover secrets, overcome dangers, and ultimately save the world from an impending threat. The atmosphere of the series is filled with mysteries, archaeological artifacts, secret organizations, and journeys into the depths of time. It is a true entertainment for those who grew up loving Indiana Jones-style adventures, treasure hunts, and mysterious mummies. After watching the first episode, one gets the feeling of returning to an era when cinema was filled with genuine adventures and heroes as ideals and symbols of courage. The wind of childhood memories once again fills the heart with nostalgia. Remember those old movies we watched with enthusiasm as children? Now all of that is presented anew, with fresh heroes and modern visual effects that create an atmosphere of magic and mystery. By the way, the series is available on vidyu.ru, and the first episode is completely free. If you are captivated by magic, mysteries, adventures, and libraries, it is definitely worth watching. And with the promo code GEO30, you can get access to the entire platform's content for just 1 ruble for 30 days. I will leave a link to this resource in the description later. For now, we return to the topic of mysterious Egypt to continue exploring its secrets and legends. But was Lord Cornwin's death truly sudden and as unexpected as it initially seems? Clearly, the matter is far more complex and multifaceted than it appears at first glance. And as historical practice and ancient legends show, the true cause could have been hidden much deeper than a simple coincidence or vexing illness. More than 20 years ago, fate once again subjected the pharaoh to a harsh lesson. As a result of a terrible car accident, his life was forever changed. He sustained serious lung injuries, and since then, this illness became a constant companion. Unsurprisingly, he found himself on the brink of what was possible, and one of the possible outcomes was his death. At the moment his wife finally extinguished the fire in Cairo, something more than just the fading of light occurred. A new chapter in his destiny began. Of course, all this happened during a time when, despite progress, technology had not yet reached modern standards. In those years, electricity in Egypt was regularly interrupted, often several times a year, creating additional difficulties and inconveniences for residents. Under such conditions, relying on a stable and continuous power supply was difficult, which only heightened the sense of danger and uncertainty. It is impossible not to notice that a small dog also appears in this story, becoming an involuntary witness to all that transpired. The dog was greatly sympathetic. Even in the hardest times, pets were considered part of the family. However, despite the sympathy, it seems almost impossible to believe that an evil Egyptian elemental could have first infected the Lord with a deadly disease, then caused an explosion at a Cairo power station, and shortly thereafter crossed the entire Europe to kill one of his dogs, especially a weak and frail one. Naturally, such fantastical assumptions offered little comfort. Many sincerely believed that behind this string of absurd misfortunes lay an ancient curse tied to the tomb of Tutankhamun. It didn't matter that opponents presented logical arguments. They could well be pointing at a sealed, soldered manuscript containing a supposed curse, or reciting words from the vows of ancient temples. May the hand raised against my image wither away. They spoke of the power of the curse protecting the tomb of Tutankhamun, and of the fact that death inevitably awaited anyone daring to break the sacred boundaries of the grave. These beliefs were so strong that a person deciding to cross the threshold of the sealed Pharaoh's tomb risked encountering inevitable doom. In his heart, the words directly echoed that death comes on the wings of fleeting fate, and that by entering inside, one becomes a victim of an ancient curse, with their colossal passion to defend the sacred boundaries becoming unbeatable. It was said that the guardian of the tomb itself, like the fire of the desert, carried its peace, and that all those who dared to disturb its rest, whether adventurers or scientists, risked perishing. After all this, faith in such protection seemed hardly possible. How could anyone believe these legends at all? The Egyptians understood. They were warning future generations. Don't meddle! Trouble will follow! And those words sounded like a strict, ancient law. Irreversible, maybe. You might think, just a legend. But that's exactly what it is. How can one respond to a skeptic who insists that all of this is just myths? He can be easily persuaded. It's all a fake, a fabrication, childish nonsense. Who could have left an inscribed curse in the tomb? Especially since the clay tablet on which it was supposedly engraved has disappeared, as if it never existed at all. No photographic or documentary evidence confirming the presence of this curse has ever been produced. It's simply a carefully guarded secret that vanished along with the artifact. Nevertheless, people continued to die. Why? After all, Lord Tutankhamun was not the only victim of the ancient tomb. Over the next 10 years, at least 9 more people passed away, all of whom had some connection to the pharaoh's burial. Among them was Prince Oleg Malbi, who also visited the tomb and was subsequently murdered by his own wife, seemingly another confirmation of the terrible power of ancient curses. Thus, despite all explanations and doubts, death continued to spare only those who crossed the boundaries guarded by the tomb, and it seems that this was the unbroken mystery, the enigma no one managed to fully solve. The connection between the discovery of the ancient Egyptian tomb and the subsequent tragedies began to take on a strange legendary hue. After the tomb was opened, Lord Cornarvan's half-brother, a close blood relative, died, his death caused by severe blood poisoning. Recently, archaeologist Hugh Evelyn White committed suicide, leaving a farewell note asking to interpret his death as an expression of a mysterious curse. In it, he clearly stated that his departure was linked precisely to this ancient force, probably sent by long-forgotten gods. Soon after, the head of the Louvre's Department of Antiquities, exhausted and shaken by the events, suffered a stroke while just having visited the tomb. Equally inexplicable and tragic, the secretary of the archaeological expedition, a young man just over 46, suddenly died in a club where he was relaxing. And a year later, on a quiet day, the father of that very secretary shot himself at his own window. This unexpected and terrible act became known to the public. And the most horrifying part, the tragedies were not limited to just specific expedition members or their relatives. At the father's funeral, during the procession, a young boy, 8 years old, was accidentally trampled by a fleeing crowd. Once again, a disturbing thought arose. The curse, it seems, began to spread not only among those directly involved in the excavation and opening of the tomb, but also to seemingly random people. And if we follow this logic, we can even arrive at more absurd, yet still persistently voiced conclusions. That even figures like President Kennedy could have fallen victim to an evil mummy. Public opinion was easily swayed by such rumors and legends, for folk creativity is a powerful force, and it seems no horror story went without support. There are stories among the people about a mule driver who, transporting a box containing a pharaoh's death mask, accidentally struck it and broke his leg. Naturally, blame was attributed to a curse. One cannot overlook the ship's assistant captain, who was transporting jewelry from Egypt. He was not physically harmed, but simply divorced his wife. Still, according to superstition, he was struck by a curse, as if by an invincible command of ancient gods. Even the renowned Egyptologist Jean-François Champollion, who died many years before these events, more than 90 years ago, was reportedly killed by the cursed influence of the pharaoh, a curse that was impossible to hear about at that time. At some point, Carter, who did not hide his skepticism, grew tired of the flood of false reports and sensational journalism. He would loudly exclaim in irritation, "Do you remember, you crazy people?" What exactly is the curse? 20th century inhabitants believed that all tomb secrets had long been uncovered, and that archaeological sites were among the safest places on Earth. Experts repeatedly assured that the tomb was one of the safest locations. Numerous researchers involved in the excavations remained unhurt and alive. However, this idea's popularity quickly. Meanwhile, Carter himself, despite scientific findings and reasoning, increasingly heard witty and cynical remarks that he had simply been tricked, or that he had chosen to oppose all rumors. He was accused of intentionally conducting his excavations to hide the true origins of accidents and deaths. If we look at cold statistical data, it becomes clear. Out of 26 people present during the tomb's opening, the same group included Carter. 6 died within a period slightly longer than 10 years. These figures, apparently, do not indicate any particular curse if considered without myth-making hypotheses. Herbert Wedlock, a staff member at the Metropolitan Museum, summed up simply and clearly, out of 26 people at the tomb's opening, 6 died within 10 years. Just statistics, nothing more. And yet, the mystery surrounding this ancient find continued to stir minds, leading many to believe in the power of an ancient curse and its uncontrollable influence. It doesn't sound very frightening, though it does arouse some suspicion. But what is far more intriguing and truly mysterious is another statement. Out of the 22 people present at the opening of the sarcophagus, 2 died within the following decade. These events do not seem particularly horrifying or even alarming, since death is a natural part of life, and each of us will eventually face farewell. However, the fact remains. The deceased were precisely those individuals who were in that specific place and at that particular time. This leads one to wonder whether there is something supernatural behind such coincidences, or if they are merely accidental. The third statement is especially noteworthy. Among the 10 participants present at the opening of Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb, not a single one died within a whole decade. This piece of information seems even more astonishing, considering that all 3 of these statements are entirely true. Our attitude towards them depends solely on our perception, on the perspective from which we view them. If we focus solely on the fact of the deaths, we might instinctively think of conspiracies, curses, or evil forces lurking behind every misfortune or illness. What is most intriguing is that the curses, about which so much has been written and spoken, seem to work rather selectively. For some reason, not everyone affected by them succumb. For example, a malevolent Egyptian spirit or entity, according to many, somehow managed to kill a poor nobleman lord who never set foot on Egyptian soil and was unaware of its secrets. Conversely, his daughter, who casually wandered through the pharaoh's burial chamber without any incident, lived to a ripe old age and died at 80. Or take archaeologist Alan Gardner, a participant in Carter's expedition, someone who witnessed and took part in all the pivotal events related to this ancient discovery, and lived to 84. Then there's Douglas Dell, who accidentally or carelessly damaged Tutankhamun's mummy. One would think he would be the natural victim of a curse. But no, he peacefully died in his bed at 17, in perfect health. Meanwhile, amidst all the mystical legends and tales, some miraculous curse somehow not only failed to achieve its supposed goal, but dangerously broke the leg of a random laborer, or ruined the marriage of a random sailor who happened to be in that danger zone. All this only reinforces the idea that even the most seemingly inexplicable cases can have entirely earthly explanations. Setting aside the theme of curses, there are also objective reasons for many strange incidents during excavations. As is known, not everyone believed in magic, but that only made cases of death and misfortune more suspicious. Many scientists and researchers believed that the tomb could have concealed some danger, perhaps poison or toxic mold, introduced into the ancient wall's carvings. Surely, in order to preserve the privacy and impermeability of the burial, the ancient priests employed special precautions beyond mere magic spells. Maybe there were sealed vessels containing poison that vaporized in the enclosed chamber, creating a hazardous atmosphere impossible for outsiders to breathe. All of this supports the hypothesis that something truly lethal was hidden within ancient tombs, and its effects were merely part of a complex security system. Ultimately, when contemplating the many mysterious events surrounding Egyptian excavations and mummies, it becomes clear that they are driven not only by mystical stories or fear of ancient evil, but also by quite understandable earthbound reasons related to the nature of substances, biological factors, or human error. And although many still try to interpret these facts as signs of ancient curses and magical powers, the truth is often much simpler and more logical than it first appears. This assumption is based on the fact that ancient Egyptian chemistry and medicine were quite primitive at that time. One could not have expected Egyptians to create a substance capable of preserving itself and maintaining effectiveness even after 3,000 years. Such an ancient poison would inevitably decompose, turning into mold, sticky honey, or similar substances that could not penetrate the pores or cracks in the stone walls of the tombs. In that case, the only possible analogy might be spores of anthrax, if they somehow managed to be there. But where would harmful bacteria or viruses come from in Egypt's arid climate? Additionally, during that period, humanity knew very little about microorganisms and their role in the decay of substances or the destruction of living organisms. People then believed that death was not caused by harmful microbes inside the body, but by the spirits of the deceased wanting to take the person away. Obviously, this was just one of the theories at the time, and no solid scientific basis was yet established. It can be assumed that over the centuries, fungi or microorganisms could have appeared in the tombs themselves, arising spontaneously. From time to time, archaeologists and scientists wondered, is it safe to be inside such ancient burial sites? For example, in the early 20th century, when Egypt became the focus of intense archaeological excavations, researcher Horatio Carter deliberately took samples from all surface areas of a tomb to determine whether any danger arose inside. His goal was to understand whether the environment was hazardous to the lives of archaeologists or not. The results of this study showed that at least 4 out of 5 samples did not contain detectable microorganisms. The only exception was a single sample that contained some microorganisms. However, they most likely came from outside, brought in by the archaeologists after the discovery and initial work. Thus, based on this data, the danger to life inside the tombs appears to be almost non-existent. There have been cases where tombs indeed caused illnesses and even deaths, some of which occurred in recent times. For example, in 1970, an excavation was carried out on the tomb of King Casimir III the Great, who ruled in the 14th century in Poland. To the surprise and concern of the researchers, 10 restorers working inside the tomb died shortly afterward. It later became clear that no one had conducted an analysis of the microbial composition inside the tomb beforehand. Only after the tragic events was it discovered that there was a massive accumulation of Aspergillus fungi, yellow and hazardous to health. This fungus produces a toxin with carcinogenic properties, aflatoxin. In small doses, this toxin is not very dangerous. However, those who worked there every day and for extended periods inhaled it and were exposed. Importantly, unlike the tomb of Tutankhamun, where causes of death were considered varied, all participants in the Polish expedition died from the same reason. Meanwhile, deaths among crews working in Egyptian tombs occurred under different circumstances and after varying time intervals. Finally, after Carter's own death, a new hypothesis emerged, which continues to provoke debate and discussion among scholars. He died in 1930 from lymphoma, which undoubtedly implied radiation exposure. How could a healthy man, only 36 years old and in the prime of life, suddenly develop cancer? The only plausible explanation at first glance was radiation exposure. Hence, the question arises, was it possible that other expedition members also developed cancer? Radiology hypothesis proponents failed to provide convincing evidence in search of an answer. They simply stated that the others who died probably had undiagnosed cancer, claiming the disease might have developed, but was not detected in time. This entire hypothesis largely stemmed from a single case of death from lymphoma. It was actively promoted by researcher Ross Flowers, who went very far in analyzing the incidence of cancer among Egyptologists. He selected 505 scientists who had died and found that 109 of them had died suddenly, and 17 were diagnosed with cancer. Based on this data, Flowers concluded that archaeologists working in Egypt were 10 times more likely to suffer from cancer than the average European. This was a rather bold statement. However, having only 17 cases of cancer among 500 people was clearly insufficient to support such claims. Even if one takes seriously the idea that these specialists truly had a higher risk of developing cancer, the question remains, what exactly emitted radiation inside the Egyptian tombs? And here we enter the realm of unscientific guesses and theories, roughly resembling quack hypotheses. The creator of the Pharaoh's idea, of course, didn't walk through the pyramids with a radiation counter. Instead, he proposed a more elaborate interpretation of ancient Egyptian myths. According to him, radioactive uranium was used in Egyptian rituals, which he called yellow cake. And this is no joke. That's actually the name, yellow cake. Imagine, priests somehow transformed this uranium into a liquid resembling milk. Now, let's read the myths more carefully. For example, it says that Osiris was milked by his mother, Isis. In Pharaoh's view, this milk was called decomposition milk. He concluded that this milk was actually radioactive uranium, and decomposition represented radioactive decay. After the god Osiris was buried in a sarcophagus hidden deep underground, access to his remains was prohibited. In his opinion, such a prohibition also indirectly pointed to radiation presence in his body. What does this mean? It's nothing but a manifestation of schizophrenia and a complete distortion of ancient Egyptian myths. Like any legend, this myth initially represents a complex metaphor, filled with symbolism and images that are often taken as truth with ease and even boldness. Attempts to break it down into simple radiation explanations, such as decay, or to connect Isis's milk with nuclear matter, for example, uranium, seem incredibly bold and even risky. Not just bold, but practically daring to the point of recklessness. Before making such high-profile claims, it would be wise to search for a real trace of radioactivity, perhaps in ancient tombs, if any radionuclides or signs of radiation exposure are found there. Overall, if we accept the hypothesis that the Egyptians already 2,000 or even 3,000 years ago knew about nuclear technologies, even more fantastic scenarios arise. For example, assuming that the ancient Egyptians attracted extraterrestrials to help build their pyramids, wouldn't that be another layer to this mystery? In the end, the whole story about the Tutankhamun curse became a popular subject for speculation and urban legends, both as a theme for stories about secret forces and for legends surrounding the Titanic tragedy. In the late 19th century, during Europe's height of imperial ambitions and explorations, 4 wealthy Englishmen traveled to Egypt for an archaeological expedition. During the excavations, they were suddenly offered to buy a mysterious and unusual artifact, an ancient mummy. One of them, risking it, paid several £1,000s and took this mystical object back to his hotel. But within a matter of hours, a series of inexplicable tragedies began. The first notice was that the mummified owner was seen without consciousness or direction, heading toward the desert. He disappeared without a trace. The next day, one of the attendants accidentally shot another servant. A third traveler returned home after learning that his bank had gone bankrupt and he had lost all his savings. The fourth fell ill and, losing his job, spent the rest of his life wandering the streets, selling cheap snacks and kvass. And these are only some of the sad stories connected to this artifact. Somehow, the mummy was indeed transported to London. Its new owner was a wealthy businessman who soon started falling ill frequently and getting into car accidents. He felt that playing with ancient magic was dangerous, and realizing that evil wouldn't leave him easily, he sold the remarkable object to the British Museum. But even in the museum, fate seemed to play a cruel game. Staff members were struck by increasingly strange misfortunes. Those involved in exhibitions broke their arms and legs, and curators who became obsessed with their work died right at their desks. I am inclined to think that describing all the misfortunes and horrors associated with this artifact would take more than one full video or story. The museum's management, tired of endless nightmares and unexplained deaths, even invited the renowned expert on exorcisms and evil spirits, Elena Blavatsky. After a thorough examination of the mummy, the specialist drew a clear conclusion. No spells or exorcisms could rid of this ancient evil. It appeared, in their view, to have become eternally alive and incapable of disappearing. That was their final opinion. It all started with a simple idea: to get rid of the mummy stored in the museum. They decided to sell it to an archaeologist from the United States, after which the artifact was loaded onto a ship to be transported to a new country. And then, the most unusual happened. The ship that carried the mummy turned out to be the Titanic. From there, the story seems to take on a grim tone, as it involves tragically terrible disasters caused by an ancient woman. Yes, it was this dead woman made of ice and dust who was the cause of the fateful events. However, as subsequent developments show, this story is merely a figment of fiction. Neither the mummy nor its connection to the Titanic tragedy exists in reality. In fact, it was about a sarcophagus lid depicting a priestess, which had long been kept in the museum and never left its premises. Moreover, suggesting that the mummy could somehow influence the fate of the legendary ship is just an urban legend. One of the key aspects here is that Elena Blavatsky, a well-known Egyptologist, could have participated in the examination of this artifact, but only in the domain of her current state, in the afterlife. After all, she died a year before the mysterious object appeared in the museum, and therefore she could not have been involved in its study or sale in any way. Moreover, and most importantly, there was no sarcophagus or lid with an image of a priestess aboard the Titanic. This is confirmed by numerous studies and records. By 1985, researcher Charles Hass carefully examined the full list of cargo loaded onto the Titanic. Among the items, there was nothing related to Egypt. No ancient artifacts, no mummies, no sarcophagi. The cargo consisted of feathers, auto parts, straw, refrigerators, completely normal and diverse goods, and there was no item connected to Egyptian cultural heritage. The sarcophagus lid does exist in reality, but it remains in the British Museum to this day and has never traveled elsewhere. It is stored there in a collection of calm and well-deserved silence, and no one experiences harm or suffering from it. Therefore, the origin of this legend is purely a fabrication. The roots of this false story can be traced back to two people, William Stett and Douglas Smiroy. It is obvious that they most likely imagined everything simply for entertainment. Their goal was to scare others, and for this purpose, they spread terrifying stories about a mysterious mummy that supposedly comes to life at night from its tomb and destroys everything around. Furniture in rooms would be broken and objects scattered and wobbling. Later, at a fateful moment, William Stett went on a voyage aboard the Titanic, where he began telling stories of a mysterious artifact that supposedly travels with the ship, a terrifying mummy. He managed to tell this tale not only to friends and close acquaintances, but also during formal dinners, just hours before the tragedy. After the shipwreck, Stett drowned, but some of the dinner participants survived and were able to tell others the real reasons behind the catastrophe. That is when the legend of the Pharaoh's curse was born, an ominous warning believed to be brought into the world by the terrible power of Egyptian tombs. Another mysterious incident from recent times is the strange event that occurred on December 25, 2013, when a video appeared online that baffled viewers with its oddity. It clearly shows an ancient figurine moving under the glass case of the Manchester Museum, and this happened not at night, but in the middle of a working day. Prior to this, a special glass enclosure was installed around the artifact, known as nefsenu, to prevent anyone from touching it in the museum. The figurine was made in ancient Egypt as an offering to the god Osiris, the god of the dead and the lord of the underworld. It is small, only 25 centimeters tall, and carved from dark stone. Then, when someone panicked and noticed the miniature figure moving, the museum's chief specialist, a curator with 20 years of experience, immediately felt a surge of fear and disbelief. Despite the enclosure of the display case, the figurine suddenly showed signs of life motion. And although it seems incredible, this is exactly what was recorded, which gave rise to many assumptions and debates among mysticism enthusiasts and fans of Egyptian secrets. One day he noticed that the figurine was positioned slightly differently than originally intended. It seemed that its placement in the display case somehow differed from what was expected, although none of the staff could explain why this was happening. Access to the key for the glass door where the valuable relic was kept was always limited to curators. Therefore, moving it on their own was impossible. Soon, attempts were made to rotate the figurine so that it faced the visitors, but despite their efforts, it stubbornly continued to turn its back towards them. What was especially surprising was that this only happened during the daytime. In the evening, when the museum doors were fully locked, the statue suddenly stopped moving and remained in a quite normal position. This fact made some observers wonder whether there was a deeper meaning behind this phenomenon. Did they not think that the statue, with its cunning, was trying to display an inscription on its back? An inscription that essentially read, "I desire a sacrifice in the form of bread, beer, bulls, and birds." In other words, could this stone sculpture, resembling the figure of an ancient pharaoh demanding offerings, be something more than just a carved figure? What does all this mean? Could there be something supernatural hidden inside the stone appearance that truly demands sacrifices? It turns out that the solution is much simpler than it initially seems. It all came down to vibrations. Look, the glass shelf on which the figurine stands slightly vibrates and has been doing so continuously throughout the day. People constantly walk around it. Cars, trams, and buses pass by. It's similar to how we notice a faint wobble in the floor when a washing machine vibrates during the spin cycle, or when any equipment creates micro-vibrations. The same thing was happening with this figurine. But then a question arises. Why did it stop rotating exactly 180 degrees? The answer lies in the shifted center of gravity. Because of this, the statue tends to balance itself, and as a result, it stops rotating. Initially, its placement in the display case was unstable because that very feature created conditions for its movement. The vibrations occurring daily allow it to reach equilibrium, and it only stops when balance is finally achieved. So, this whole story about a pharaoh's curse is most likely a typical Victorian-era tale, filled with fears of the unknown and mysticism. At that time, belief in the mysterious power of ancient cultures, romance, and superstitions played an important role in people's consciousness. Additionally, during those years, medicine was far from modern accuracy and effectiveness, and simple ailments and diseases often ended fatally. That is why the idea of terrible curses arose, supposedly looming over these tombs. Believers in the supernatural claimed that ancient priests, in protecting the repose of their rulers, cast magical spells on the tombs to prevent anyone from disturbing their eternal bliss. And the series of deaths, all of this, in their view, was evidence of these mystical forces. It was never possible to fully explain all the strange and inexplicable deaths or illnesses. Investigations into hypotheses such as radiation or dangerous fungi causing incurable diseases proved unsuccessful or were dismissed. The hypothesis of radiation seems utterly absurd and even comical, like a long-standing joke that never stops being told. The simple conclusion is that no real curse exists. All of this is a chain of coincidences, random events, and ancient myths imposed by human imagination. Some people died prematurely, others lived to old age, and these situations had no connection to each other. Ultimately, it all boils down to a series of coincidences and false beliefs disguised as something mystical and supernatural. Unfortunate Cornouan, whose history was filled with so many illnesses that it could be compared to a long list of treasures extracted from the ancient tomb of Tutankhamun, found themselves among those whom fate dealt a double blow. Not only did their health fail during the long and exhausting journey from England to Egypt, after all, such expeditions were a severe test for anyone, but the tragic end of this endeavor inspired a series of heated speculations and rumors in people's minds. Now, every misfortune that befell members of the Egyptian archaeological team was perceived as if it were Lord Carton's personal fault, as if someone often questioned why they even dared to undertake such dangerous expeditions into the darkness of antiquity. Ultimately, it seemed as though they had taken responsibility for all the mysteries and troubles of the uncovered secrets. But looking deeper into the newspapers and magazine articles covering these events, it becomes clear that behind these dramas was not accident or curse, but simple journalism seeking to profit from popular and fear-provoking information. Journalists and tabloids exaggerated an already sensational topic to the limit, turning random incidents into large-scale tragedies. In pursuit of ratings, they did not shy away from distorting facts, presenting them as entirely different, often false, stories. For example, if someone accidentally scratched their finger near a mummy, the next day a tale would follow about bloody misfortunes and mysterious deaths supposedly connected to this incident. Sometimes the stories reached absurdity, claiming that someone had died bleeding near coffins, all without proper evidence. These legends and myths continue to live today in popular books, movies, computer games, and the collective consciousness. Even if a person does not believe in magical curses or supernatural powers, they still know about them, through various sources, old and new. Perhaps the reason for the resilience of these myths lies in their universal and eternal appeal to people from any culture. At their core, it is not so much a fear of evil gods or vengeful priests with poisons, but rather the feeling that we cross a boundary of what is permitted, entering an alien and mysterious world. The peace of the pharaohs, preserved through the ages, seems almost sacred, a private territory of the unexplained and inviolable. And when someone dares to disturb this peace, an inner sensation arises that punishment will surely follow, heavy, terrible, and unpredictable. Such an attitude prevails also in regard to the burial sites of our ancestors. All these fears are, in essence, echoes of an internal fear of death, as well as of unknown worlds awaiting us after life. They testify to a deep, nostalgic feeling that death is not an end, but merely a transition into the unknown, which evokes awe and reverence. This is reflected in the popular plots of countless movies, books, and games linked to the Egyptian curse. Despite their fiction or fantasy, there is something in these stories that resonates deeply with human perceptions of fate. Perhaps within this idea lies some universal and eternal truth for people of any culture. It is not so much the fear of an evil god or a terrible priest, but the feeling that when entering a forbidden world, we seem to violate an established law, and retribution will inevitably follow. The peace and mystery of ancient pharaohs' tombs undoubtedly seem almost sacred, untouched for millennia. That is why any intrusion appears infinitely dangerous, as if igniting a hidden fear of a high price for disobedience. All these are fragments of a general fear, concerns about personal destiny, the inevitability of death, and the unknown secrets beyond the boundary of life. They seem to echo the internal feeling that death will inevitably catch everyone, and behind it lies something impenetrable and terrible, remaining beyond human understanding. The great and unsettling truth is the feeling that we are all connected by this ancient fear, which only changes form but never disappears. Deep inside, many still sense the presence of this eternal fear, making it part of their cultural memory. And perhaps it is precisely because of this that myths of curses and mysteries of Egyptian tombs remain so alive today, continue to be relevant, and evoke interest in new generations.